and then the operator will take the in cord to answer it, plug in wire, switch forward to speak, ask what number they require, and then take the outer cord from there.
We have one of the old magneto telephone exchanges. This one was brought into operation in about 1957, and it was then in use right up until 1989. And it was built up in several units. There were, ended up, I think, 4 units like this, but it was limited to the amount of lines going out, and it was 480 right up until it closed in 1989. But the system worked all over the islands, out into the camp. On the east, they were all connected to Stanley. It worked, but you can't say it was an ideal system. And the further away you got, of course, the worse things became.
Before there was a telephone exchange, the first land call was held in 1897.
The very first telephone line in the islands actually ran from the lighthouse up to the police station. And a very, very simple system. You had one line coming up, one single wire, and you had an earth. And so you put one end into the ground at either end, and you just had the one wire, and you just turned the handle, and it just rang between the 2 fixed points. Well, this here would have been the style of telephone that was first in use. You had a separate earpiece and then a separate mouthpiece, and again magneto turn the handle to generate the electricity, which then rang at the distant end, and when you put the phone down, you still then had to turn the handle again to ring off. It would have been a very big development. Before then, communications was with flags, or else some guy had to jump on a horse and gallop up, and it's 7 miles from the lighthouse, so it would take them a little while to get to Stanley.
The first radio station was erected in 1912, which enabled islanders to make telecom contact with the outside world.
The first external communications was from a Marconi spark transmitter. It would have been something quite a lot larger than this, but it worked on the same principle. The signal was actually generated by passing electricity across a gap, and it was the spark created across the gap that caused the dots and dashes of the Morse code. You would have used a Morse key to actually generate the pulses of electricity. It was designed to communicate to Stanley, but it could have communicated to Montevideo, and that's where most external communications went from the islands, was to Montevideo. Improvements were made during the First World War, but it wasn't really until the Second World War that things then really took off and they started to be miniaturized. It wasn't until 1966 when we got the first teletype. It was, in the intervening years, still the same Morse code technology. The internet came to the Falklands, of course, in 97, so it's just been around now for coming up to 20 years. Believe it or not, it's only 10 years since mobile phones were introduced in the islands. So yeah, things have just moved on so fast, it's difficult to keep up. But I started with Morse code, and for the first 30 years of my career, wasn't a lot of change.